we've written in our paper, Embodying Addiction, that maybe it's less that we're going through an opioid crisis and more that we're going through a meaning crisis, that actually the reason we're turning to synthetic experiences of satiation, which is what heroin does, is because we feel empty, we feel bereft of meaning, we can't get a good grip, and so we're turning to synthetic supports.
You mentioned just now you guys are working and just released a paper on social media, and I think it's kind of a cool way to just think about the ways in which the current frameworks in cognitive science, predictive processing, active inference can be applied to the world at the moment. So one of you tell me about that paper.
Yeah, can I just foreground Ben, and then you jump in and say the specifics. So just if people aren't familiar with Ben and my's work, we've got a little slurry of papers coming out right now, joint papers. We've got we just had a Phil Trends B paper, Surfing Uncertainty with Screams, come out, which is on horror movies and violent video games and mental health. It's got a little bit of national attention, which is cool. It got picked up by the paper in Australia, so we've been on a couple morning shows with that paper, which is cool. We've got a paper coming out on the challenges and potential problems for social media with predictive systems, coming out in Neuroscience of Consciousness soon. And we've got a third one, which was Ben's baby, looking at AI environments like smart houses and the positive impacts of that. So what we actually have is a little collection of like tech, the way that tech impacts cognitive systems. And I think actually that's going to turn out to be Ben's doctoral thesis, which is why these are coming out in quick succession. So yeah, we can talk about any of that stuff. I think is a good option. Do you have any specific interest there, Jack? Social media, maybe?
You know, the reason I bring that up is I'm kind of fascinated by how this framework, predictive processing and active inference, like why and how it can be applied to such a rich range of areas. And I'm just trying to think about, is this framework in cognitive science, does it kind of complete cognitive science? You know, I mean, like it seems to pervade it, you know, and it goes down to the basis of physics of being prediction machines. So maybe explain what this framework in cognitive science is, and what do you think its limits and pros are, and how it's changed cognitive science, and then we could kind of apply it and explore things like social media.
Yeah, you want to take a crack, Ben?
Yeah, I can, because it speaks to the main reason that I ended up in this area of research in the first place, which is I had been interested in various phenomena kind of in psychology and cognitive science and philosophy for a while, like, for example, depression. And work in this area with predictive processing and kind of 4E embodied affective cognitive science really stuck out to me, because it seemed to be able to provide multi-layer explanations in a way that kind of other more insular disciplines wasn't doing.
Nice.
So what predictive processing adds to that is a theory of brain function on a computational level. And so this is something that Andy Clark has said, which is that you have this over the last few decades, you have cognitive science has created this vision of the mind or the agent as embodied and extended. And it's kind of pushed the boundaries out from the brain through the body into the world in this really interesting, rich way. But what was kind of missing from that picture, or kind of slightly ironically all along, was the theory of what was actually going on in the brain. And so I think what predictive processing does by slotting into that cog-sci picture is that you end up with these incredible accounts of things like depression and addiction, which Mark's done work on, which was really inspiring for me, where you start with a kind of neurobiology, then the computational level, then the embodied kind of inactive level, how an agent engages with their environment. And then that really allows you to kind of see the amount of justice that you need to do to kind of social, cultural factors. And maybe we can talk about some of the, like a lot of the cutting edge work in predictive processing and active inference is on those social, cultural factors as well. So you get this just very layered, rich, thick account of quite interesting phenomena. And I think I see my dissertation as just a kind of small contribution to that, which is, okay, we've pushed the boundaries out from the brain into the body, into the world. What about the kind of weirdest near future tech that we can imagine? So I started with social media, and now ambient technology I think is very interesting. And I think the framework is probably the best one we've got to look at these things.
You know, what's so interesting is that we have a positive account of the way that AI and smart environments might help mental health. that's a little bit provocative and a little bit sexy and a little bit inspired, but we don't normally think that. I think we tend to think that AI is a bit doom and gloom. And Ben's done a wonderful job of showing why it might be of benefit. And we've got this other project where we're thinking about the benefit of horror movies and violent video games on mental health. Again, a bit sexy, a bit provocative, not what you'd expect. And yet, when it comes to social media, our main line is social media is horrible for you.
Yeah.
Even for two people who are like tech positive forward, social media is still crap.
For the people that really want to put it forward, it's not
exactly.
that much going for.
Even
Okay,
for the
okay.
people who want to make tech good, it's a challenge. Yeah.
Okay, but let's explore that. But I just wanted to say one thing, which is that on Ben's point of the rich way in which cognitive science is sort of expanding itself beyond just like a individual self and sort of into the environment, into the coupling between other people, which is that I study economics at the moment. And sometimes I wanted to kind of ask about that. Sometimes I think that fields like economics, like biology, there's going to be almost have to be a merging between them. They're going to have to speak to each other.
Mm-hmm.
I think about economists trying to think about, ways in which we can improve people's happiness, income and things. But sometimes I think there would be some benefit in actually needing to take a kind of approach where we think about the cognitive mechanisms behind things. And if there is a way in which we can stop thinking about people as an isolated kind of self. So yeah, you're almost changing the boundaries of what we mean by, any individual isolated discipline. So okay, social media is someone want to start there and
nice.
explore this?
Yeah, I think so. This work was originally my master's degree dissertation, and I think, if I recall correctly, the thing that got me interested in it was the empirical. So there's a lot of experimental psychology work on social media, looking at the kind of putative links between social media and various psychopathologies like anxiety and depression, and the empirical
dysmorphia.
Body dysmorphia. I mean, pretty much everything. There's literature on body dysmorphia, anxiety, depression, FOMO,
dissociation.
Association, yeah, lots and lots. I mean, pretty much everything that can go wrong apparently is going wrong in response to this stuff. But if you look at the empirical literature, it's quite an unclear picture. So there are various papers that claim to have found like a strong link between, or at least a correlation between social media and, say, for example, depression. And for every paper like that, there's another study that claims that these links aren't actually there, and that this is correlation, not causation, and all of that very well-known stuff. And so what I was trying to do, what I thought was missing actually was a kind of theoretical framework for thinking about human technology interaction that actually made contact with those layers that I was talking about a second ago. And so the kind of impetus for the project was to provide that in a way, and I thought that predictive processing is particularly good for that.
To set up the problem, definitely in the world around us, we have kind of seen this rise, and and you say like it's almost really paradoxical and surprising that there'd be so many kind of problems. And you can try and look on maybe explain on an individual basis. Okay, they're having this body dysmorphia there, and there's depression here, but then why the sort of aggregation of all these different kinds of problems? And Mark is nodding. So maybe dive into that.
This is kind of the interesting reason why drawing on something like a predictive processing framework is relevant for uncovering some of that, because not only do we have a unified theory of cognition, so that's pretty interesting, but it becomes completely non-surprising that all these pathological outcomes are comorbid with social media use as soon as you appreciate the fact, and potentially the fact that you are a prediction machine. The way you work, the way you thrive and are well in the world is that you are generating a model of how things change and move over time, especially relative to your interaction with the environment. And the better that model, the better you feel and the better fit you make with the niche. I mean, the better we're able to predict the real statistical invariance, like the real way that the world works, the better we are at being able to feel at home in the world. Okay, that's the take-home message. That's the big take-home. If you are a prediction machine in a volatile environment, what it means to feel at home is that you've got a good, solid grip on how things work. Okay. For that kind of system, which is primarily an epistemic system, it's trying to get a grip on how things really are in the world. That is its bread and butter. That's how the system earns its salt here, okay? Is it figures out how things really are in the world. That's what it's for. It's what you're for in a way, okay? Then systematic dishonesty and systematic breach of real world invariance is completely poisonous for us. Like as a system, like if you are built to get a good grip on how things work, anything that inundates you with bad evidence, like Instagram, that's just giving you bullshit after bullshit. It's just a systematic lie factory that people take to be real. And even if you, the agent, is like, no, I know it's fake. That's why I'm safe from it, even though I'm scrolling 7 hours a day. Just for anybody who's listening to this, if that's you, that's not true at all. Okay. Just because you, the agent, knows something doesn't mean that the system at large isn't picking up belief, isn't altering its belief networks relative to that. I mean, the good example for that is placebo effect, right? So we all know placebo works, but did you know that, if I take you to a hospital and I introduce you to my buddy who's wearing a white coat and has a stethoscope on and is shaking a bottle of pills at you, and I say, that's an actor, that's not a doctor. They don't know anything about medicine. If they tell you the medicine will work, it will still work. The placebo effect still works. Why is that? Well, because the agent level is just the shallowest part of the predictive dynamical set. The rest of the system is going, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck. That's a duck. If you're in a hospital and they have a white coat and they have a stethoscope, that's enough predictive evidence for the outcome to be relatively sure. There's a high probability that the pills that I get in that situation are going to be the ones that are impactful. Same thing with social media. Even if you're like, oh, I know it's fake. If you're being shown image after image after image that are filtered and staged, your system doesn't necessarily know that just because you know it. And so we are bending our own generative model away from true invariance in the environment. No wonder we get sick, because we're built for that.
Yeah. Just to kind of emphasize, just to add to that, I think one of the kind of catchy taglines for predictive processing is that your conscious experience, I forget the actual phrase and it's escaping me, but your conscious experience is essentially a construct. It's a controlled hallucination.
Controlled hallucination, exactly.
That's the one. Yeah. Essentially what that means is that the way your experience of the world, your subjectivity, is constructed through and constituted by your expectations. And so if you're that kind of system, then the evidence that you consume from the world really matters in a very deep way. And so social media, we argue in the paper, is essentially a bad evidence generator, or I should say it can be a bad evidence.
That's better.
It isn't necessarily the case, and it's certainly not true for everybody. But in these cases where social media, for various reasons, and we can go into that, becomes this kind of bad evidence generator, it can act as a kind of crowbar that prizes your generative model out of sync with reality in a way that we think, hypothesize, can cause these instances of psychopathology. And I just want to bring attention to a study that supports something Mark was saying there. There's some work by Marika Tigerman and colleagues, some experimental psychology on body dysmorphia and content on social media. And what they looked at was the efficacy of applying essentially warning labels to doctored images. So it was an app that would, whenever somebody looked at an image where the model had been photoshopped or it had been staged, a thing would come up, essentially like a kind of warning on cigarette packets that would say, this isn't real. You're viewing something that is fake. It's been constructed. This isn't a veridical representation of a human body. And what they found was that over time, this had like no effect. Like it was just absolutely useless at kind of ameliorating the kind of negative feelings that people were having. And I think this is like a stark demonstration that even if you know something's not real, even if you know that your Instagram or TikTok feed is just completely misrepresentative of reality, there's a kind of real sense in which that doesn't matter. And so I think that really speaks to just how dangerous this can be under the wrong circumstances.
Right. I mean, and I guess what I wanted to pick up on one thing though, which is that there's a kind of tension here I'm feeling, which is that if social media if we obviously noticed it as being completely absent and disconnected from reality, there would be nothing salient about it. There would be nowhere in which to get our system going, right?
No,
So there's
no,
going.
no, no,
So
no,
what
no.
is it?
Yeah. No,
So
not at all.
what is the middle ground to why are we connecting to it, but then why is it subverting that machinery of our cognition in the ways it does?
Yeah, two things there quick. One is just because you know a thing doesn't mean the system knows the thing. So the system is still thinking it's getting good evidence. And the second thing is it's the reason that we're fascinated by it is the same reason we get fascinated to anything that's addictive. It's setting up cues that we're hardwired to be tracking. So if it's showing us beauty standard stuff, I mean, we're tracking that as salient already as kind of social animals. And we're already vulnerable to this because what it's doing is you have very smart people coming straight out of very good schools being bought up by these companies. So for just this reason, if you're attracted to beauty as part of a social tracking, and you're given filtered images, even though you know it, it's still making the system act as if it's catching better than expected evidence for the way that, for encountering beautiful images or encountering sexual images or whatever it is that we're going after. So even if you know it's false, the system is still being rewarded. And in particular, it's designed for that. It's designed to capture that in particular.
Like with the hospital example, we might see, okay, you're saying that one doctor is an actor. Okay, but I'm in the environment of a hospital. Everything else looks right to me. How many times has that happened
in your life? How many times have you encountered a doctor in a hospital and it's been a real doctor? You have extremely high probability that's the case.
It's hard to even if someone's gonna maybe even said, I don't know, someone have to do this experiment, but someone even saying to you, literally everything in this hospital is fake. But it's like, how do you fake the feel of a hospital? So part of it's not fake, and so with social media, there's something about it in which it's giving you the surface and a veil of like there's a realness to it.
Here's a good sorry, Ben, one thing quick and then over to you. A good example is like social credit. So part of the thing that we are trying to achieve as a predictive machine is we have a high expectation for social proclivities. So we want to fit well with our social in a socially dynamical way. We want people to like us and to be supported. And that makes sense evolutionarily that we have people around us. And so we already have this high expectation to be social. And you now have this amazing ability to far exceed any kind of expectations for social prosperity using social media. Like Genghis Khan didn't have so many friends as people do today, and he owned half the world. You get 10 billion people saying you're doing great. Your system is going, well, this is the way to go. Like if you're trying to predict the behaviors that lead to those highly expected states, like being socially rich, then this is a no-brainer to go like this. The problem is that it's like empty calories. It's triggering the system as if you are getting this massive uptick in sociality. And so the behaviors that led to that should gain in confidence. They should be the behaviors that you predict will bring about those excellent outcomes. But actually at the end of the day, how many people that like your thing are going to show up in hospice and change your diaper and hold your hand as you pass out of this life? And how many, I say that to my students sometimes because I teach on this quite a lot. Like, how many of your social media friends are showing up like that? Because the dynamical system was evolved to help track and to take care of real social connection so that you have a life filled with those kinds of people where you have a real network of support. And so there's a real danger because you're getting cued as if you've got a massive amount of support. And that's what the system is built for, but it's a completely empty venture or a largely empty venture.
It's one of the, it's an interesting feature of technology, I think that, from a predictive processing perspective, a healthy functioning predictive system is one that is kind of fundamentally optimistic. So in order to survive, you have to, on some level, expect to be fed, expect to be social, expect to find partners. If you didn't expect those things, then there would be no motivation to get you out of this kind of canonical dark room problem. Okay, so you have to be moved to pursue rewarding things. And this is a very good thing because it means that we find the things that we need. But one of the peculiar things about technology is that we seem to have developed a capacity to develop what has been called supernormal stimuli. So we pick something that is rewarding, so food or sex, and we develop things like junk food and pornography, which are these kind of perverse simulacrums of the rewarding stimulus. When we make the analogy with pornography in the paper, kind of social media socializing is to real socializing what pornography is to sex. It's this kind of abstraction. You're kind of extrapolating the exciting thing, but you're leaving behind
the meat,
actually really nourishing.
Yeah.
And there was some interesting experiments done on this that showed if you take the eggs of a specific kind of bird and you create fake eggs that kind of mimic and amplify the markings and colorings of those eggs, the birds will actually abandon their real eggs and they'll go and sit on the fake eggs, which is just kind of like a horrific, kind of speaks to just how bad this problem can be, I think.
A priori, I kind of have hoped, maybe even predicted, without social media. Imagine I was in a world without it, which I haven't been, being as young as I am, but effectively. But I would have assumed that we surely wouldn't been like tricked so much. I mean, that biological example of birds.
Yeah.
Like, why? Please. But it makes me kind of want to say, like, is this the problem with any kind of online, even technological environment, like that's kind of abstracting away from what we've evolved and sort of what we're naturally coupled to? And maybe is there a segue into AI and trying to think about technological environments that you've also written about? Like, what can solve these kinds of problems, given that it's not even necessarily an isolated problem that's just
maybe we can split it like this, Ben. Let me say a little bit about what gets us caught, and then it might be nice to talk about some of the benefits, because this is something Ben's extremely good at. One of the ways that we get caught is that, like Ben said, we have these expectations for certain rewarding states. Rewards just are high expectations according to the model. And so we're all the time being tuned to finding opportunities to close the gap between where we are and these highly expected rewarding states. So one of the dangers online is that you create these massive opportunities to do what appears to be reducing the difference between where you are and where you expect to be. So it's already alluring for our kind of system, like dangerously alluring. But I don't think actually that's the problem. I think the real problem is that systems that are encountering a tremendous amount of uncertainty, either because you haven't developed the skills and abilities to manage the volatility in your environment, or the environment just is too volatile to get a good predictive grip on. In that situation, predictive systems like us, we really feel under pressure. That's sort of what we might be a kind of background anxiety example, and depression spawns from this. So you just can't get a good grip on your niche for whatever reason over a long period of time, causes all sorts of system catastrophes. Okay. It's I think the primary issue isn't the generation of these things, really. It's that for whatever reason, we as a culture feel that we can't get a good predictive grip, partially because of the kinds of beliefs that we have about our life and the sorts of things that we want. Those are being bent out of shape. And we're living in situations where we're not able to fulfill the kinds of things that we've been set up to desire. And it's creating a meaning crisis. I think John Vervaeke's probably right here that we're in a meaning crisis, and a meaning crisis here could be translated as an inability to grip well on your changing niche. And if that's happening, then these artificial opportunities to feel as though to have the physiological sensation that you have caught up to where you expect to be and indeed surpassed it, that's when it becomes really dangerous. So the thing in and of itself might not be as dangerous as the thing. It would be like bad food isn't the problem. Starvation plus bad food. Now you've got a real recipe for disaster, because the system will eat anything at this state, and then you're offering it, even though it's hollow, food that's going to give you the sense that you're full. It's not surprising that we jump at it. We've written in our paper, Embodying Addiction, that maybe it's less that we're going through an opioid crisis and more that we're going through a meaning crisis, that actually the reason we're turning to synthetic experiences of satiation, which is what heroin does, is because we feel empty, we feel bereft of meaning, we can't get a good grip, and so we're turning to synthetic supports. I think that's probably right.
Yeah.
I kind of want to say, go on.
Well, I'm just kind of thinking back to the original question you asked about kind of what does this example of the supernormal stimulus kind of mean for the way we think about technology and kind of how to remedy it. I think the first thing is that it shows that if we're concerned about human well-being and happiness, then how we design technology is an extremely non-trivial problem. I think most people kind of already think that, but it's like the way that it can entangle and quite profoundly affect how we experience everything in the world, including ourselves and our emotions, is kind of can happen very easily. It's an extremely powerful tool to affect those kinds of things. And it's difficult to think kind of what level to approach the problem on in terms of remedying it. I think there's something that I don't really engage with too much in my work is the kind of socioeconomic, like the economic incentives that are, I mean, all of this, of course, is taking place in a particular kind of economic system that incentivizes things in a certain way. And so very smart people have written very good things about how there's a kind of attention economy. I know Jared Lanier has written on this quite a lot, and some other people as well. Just the business model of social media companies is kind of incentivizing algorithms that have this kind of express objective of constricting your attention in a particular kind of way. They kind of create a very uneven attractor landscape in terms of like the states that you occupy. And there's been work on this in predictive processing that looks at adversarial inference. So the idea that these algorithms, what they're actually doing is they're kind of inferring things about you in order to more efficiently manipulate you. So I think I'm more interested in the design side of things. So just kind of hypothetically, how could we use cognitive science to design technology that is maybe better for us, or can maybe the goal of which is to increase happiness and flourishing as opposed to diminishing it. I think I like to think in terms of these attractor landscapes, kind of what is the effect of the technology on the kind of scope of your cares and concerns? Like, what kind of a role is it playing there? So, for example, with something like social media shorts, the stated objective of that is to just hold your attention in place for as long as possible, and it does it remarkably well. So what I think about, especially with ambient technology, is how can we think about this completely differently? And so one of the papers that we're hoping to have out soon talks about how ambient technology can play this more background role. So rather than appearing as an affordance for the agent to use and engage with, what it actually does is learn things about the agent and then support action by kind of acting behind the scenes to restructure information in the environment. So I think thinking about how we can remedy it, it's like a huge question, and there's kind of different ways you can get into that. But the design side of things, I think, is where predictive processing is useful.
What I'm hearing there is a kind of, if in a way, companies or people who, whether they know it or not, in some deep sense, like they have a really good understanding of cognitive science, and they're like seeing how to, constrict someone's attention.
Yeah.
But then, so maybe trying to use technologies to actually kind of open that back up again and sort of,
that's that's the heart of our project, actually, looking at how there's a continual closing from some technologies and then thinking about how technology could create a continual opening. So, Jack, that's perfectly stated.
I mean, they literally do. I mean, one of the things about, I mean, this is fairly common knowledge, I think, but in the case of social media, I mean, the people that design this, they speak to scientists who study gambling addiction. So they understand very well, like, for example, there's a certain intermittency of cued reward that people under lab conditions find the most arousing. I think it's a cued reward appears 50% of the time. So there's people that their job is to design digital gambling machines that go in Las Vegas bars, and they want people to put as much money in them as possible. And the people that design social media algorithms go to those scientists, and they essentially use the same technology. That technology has been used in loot box dynamics in various video games. And you get the people that design these video games then appearing in front of select committees in the UK Parliament denying that it's gambling and calling it a kind of anticipation-based game dynamics instead. This kind of stuff needs to stop because it's bullshit. And so that's one front that we can fight this on. So it's not that they kind of accidentally stumbled upon these things. Like they've deliberately learned how to kind of hack people's cognitive system.
Right. Well, so I'd love to get into some of like solutions and like how to think about remedies, but also what would you say to a critique that goes, I've been reading or trying to read Heidegger recently. It's a bit difficult, but people like John Roos as well, philosophers who are inspired by him and thinking about, to what degree should we combat technologies with more technologies? I mean, does that further restrict us from our own natural sort of I like one view of when we don't have technologies, they arguably make things easier, they give us nice rewards, but then we learn things without using technology. So what about maybe developing our own skills? How does that play in?
Heidegger used reading and writing. These are technologies. These aren't sort of naturally available to us
right.
in the wild. So, I mean, we've been using technologies for a long time. I think, and then Ben, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this too. One thing that stands out is if you think about it from this perspective of the brain as an anticipatory machine, then I think it gives us some sort of an answer here, which is you're built to predict well. There are elements of technology that are going to help us track regularities in the environment that are meaningful for us, that our perceptual systems haven't evolved to be able to track very well. And we see that all over the place in just natural evolution. If an animal can't change fast enough its phenotype, it finds a cultural or technological extension solution, like the tuna, which is it can move and evade in the ocean 7 times faster and sharper, like by a degree of 7 times than its musculature should allow it. Right. So there's a puzzle there. Why does the bluefin tuna, why can it move in such a powerful way? And the answer is it starts using the eddies in the water to generate propulsion. And then the more interesting bit is it actually creates those eddies with a swing of its tail that it then pushes off of. I mean, that's just the use of your niche to reduce the volatility in a faster than expected way. So I think technology by itself isn't going to be demonized here, because technology is really good at tracking invariance that we're not good at. That's meaningful invariance, like, for instance, heart rate variability. I mean, athletes who are now looking at their own heart rate variability and using that as another stream of information for what sorts of exercise and what sorts of regimes are best for their mental, physical, emotional health. It's difficult, if not impossible, to track your own heart rate variability. It's so subtle. I mean, you really have to do something very special. I mean, maybe lifelong yogi or something could do this, but I'm not convinced that that's the case. There's a really easy way that we can use technology that really does have a positive impact, because it's helping us track invariance that matters. The problem is that when it leverages the other way, which is not technology for you, but where the technology is checking for your invariance and then using that to leverage in order for you to behave in some way, that it becomes nefarious. But Ben does a lot of work on this. What do you think, Ben?
Well, yeah, mean, as much as I would like to go away and live in a cabin in Alaska and live a very low tech lifestyle, I think I'm kind of very much of the opinion that it's not. I mean, if the suggestion is to reduce our reliance on technology in some way, I'm not sure that that's really a plausible prospect. I'm very much with Andy Clark, who's also here at Sussex, in thinking I think human beings are in some sense natural born cyborgs. I think we are metamorphic creatures. I think one of the things that comes from predictive processing is this idea of the Markov blanket and how fluid and transient those boundaries can be. So if the agent is this kind of prediction error minimizing machinery, then what constitutes that machinery changes moment to moment. I mean, all three of us right now are wearing clothes, which are a kind of technology.
Right.
And so I think we tend to underestimate the degree to which we just very naturally and fluidly unfold technologies into our lives. And in some cases, these can be, they can improve our life and prospects immeasurably. I think there's just a fight to be had here, which is people need to be making the case against bad technology, and to not be afraid to kind of highlight it where they see it. And I think this is why the conversation around social media content is so important. I don't think we talk enough about social media content specifically. So yeah, I mean, I like technology. I think it has like this huge, profound potential. I mean, one of the things we're thinking about in terms of ambient technology is the way that it can potentially support people with conditions like dementia. I've had family members with dementia, and I think that if we can design environments, again, kind of coming back to this background supportive role. So technology, I think, should support you in the pursuit of the things that make your life good, not try to be one of those things that makes your life good, if that makes sense. So, I mean, there's work I'm working on things now where I'm trying to develop this new concept of a meta affordance to try and articulate this. So affordances are opportunities for action in the environment. They're kind of things that show up to the agent as something that you can do or use. And a meta affordance is trying to capture this role of kind of operating upstream of organizing affordances in an optimal way in support of some end that the agent already has. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the kind of direction that I'm moving.
And parents do that for us, right? The way that we learn how to act in the world is we have parents first act. I mean, if we're lucky, we have good parents act as a meta layer, helping us decide what things that call us are useful and which ones aren't, and how we should be orienting in the world. So one of the ideas in the paper that will be coming out soon, we hope, is that smart ambient technology, like a smart house. And a smart house, if you're not sure what that is, it's like everything in the house is tracking you. Like the fridge knows what you eat, and the floor knows how much you weigh, and the toilet knows how much you poop, and like the whole house knows everything about you. Okay. And then the house can really start seeing some of the invariants that you're not able to track. And you can, over time, between you and the house, you can come up with some ways to, some goals that the house can then help you fulfill by helping to adjust the way that you're understanding yourself, or you're understanding your routines. So in a way, we're thinking smart technology could act like a parent acts early on, helping you remodel the sorts of things that you find valuable or interesting.
Actually, I think it's important, just as a kind of asterisk here, to say that, like Mark was saying, when we were doing this work on social media, it had this quite critical, pessimistic air to it. And whenever I kind of spoke to people about that, one of the first questions I would get was like, like, why are you so pessimistic about all of this? It's all doom and gloom. So
and now we get the opposite about our new paper. Why are you so optimistic?
That's where I'm going. Yeah. So what characterizes this work on ambient technology is this like wild optimism. So I'm just kind of clearly, like, I know that when I talk to people about this, people are always like, "Ooh, that technology sounds like it could be really dangerous." And like, yeah, it super could. But I think one of the things we're trying to do with this work is to just be like engage the radical imagination a little bit, and kind of think, well, okay, like given the tools of cognitive science, like how good could it get? Like what is like the best case scenario for technology? So I just wanted to say that, because I know like with ambient technology, when we talk about smart homes, like clearly there's like an capacity for them to be equally awful. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the key will be you have to buy the AI. It shouldn't be somebody else's. You don't want McDonald's sponsoring the smart house AI, like subtly bending you towards wanting chicken nuggets. Right, so you'd want to own the AI.
I like both your responses to my concerns in that being natural born cyborgs, being people that take up technologies so naturally that they then recede into the background, and then also Mark's point on a kind of meaning crisis. Like, we want to take up technologies and we're gonna be constantly searching for ways to better fit with our environment. So to say that to avoid technologies, no, we should be taking up technologies to improve our fit to the environment. And so I like the concept of a meta affordance. Then it's like, okay, step back, be as we are, as maybe humans uniquely are, the kind of agents that can have predictive models over long periods of time, and then see into the future and try and shape things so that, I like listening to Michael Levin talk about the cognitive light cone, this way in which can we become increasingly longer term in our planning, because in addiction, me and Mark, we talked about that last time, right? If you're in the throes of an addiction, and you've taken cocaine for weeks on end, obviously that next time you see cocaine, you might not be able to avoid it, but slowly, if you develop the capacities, you begin to meditate, you develop the ways in which actually you can have sort of a meta way to sort of hone in and retune the way you act. Then over time, you can have greater agency. And so it's not the case that we're going to instantly have infinite agency and have superpowers and avoid all the dangers of social media. So how can we use technology to kind of aid us in using it correctly, right? As you say, there are benefits. So we kind of covered social media there, kind of out of time as well.
Technology.
Is there anything else you want to say on this? This paper you had on,
that's sort of our work in a bite, actually.
Yeah,
so that's good.
No, I like the kind of the way the themes here just flowed through each other and interconnected. One final thing is, and if we wanted to get into things like you have work on horror movies and stuff, we could do that another time maybe. Other ways in which the predictive processing framework, because sometimes I think that it kind of makes us seem a bit like we're robots, like we're these people that automatically we just fit efficiently to our environment. How, if it's going to be such a pervasive framework in cognitive science, is it? I always want to ask: is it kind of weird to me? Sometimes I'm like, it's surprising how it is such a kind of elegant thing that can be applied to things like social media, to AI and technology. So is there anything to say about just how strange it is that it can be applied to such a wide range of areas? And does that
First thing I want to say is other people think it's weird, so you're not alone there. But I think people are I think it's easy to criticize it, and people are getting some social credit for criticizing it in a sort of unreasonable way. If it is a unifying framework, then you would expect it to apply everywhere that cognition is applicable. That shouldn't be surprising. If this is a unifying idea about what the cognitive system is doing, then it should be applicable everywhere that we're talking about cognitive dynamics. It shouldn't be like, oh my goodness, look, it works there too. You're like, yeah, we're talking about a minded thing engaging with its niche. That's exactly, of course, it should always fit there. Right. And then just add to that we're now building AI using the same principles. So it's the natural shared currency for thinking about minded things and AI things, for thinking about deep learning algorithms, deep learning predictive algorithms, and minded agents, or even life forms. If you think that life forms are organizing in this way also like the way they achieve optimization is the same way. Then it is literally the shared currency. So not only is it not weird, but anything else would be weird, I think, as a framework, because you have one model that is useful for thinking about the minded thing and the deep learning algorithm. And so of course it's the one you'd grab for thinking about how they work together. I know your worry. I get your worry, but I'm not worried. But I'm also, I've drank the Kool-Aid in a meaningful way. But I'm not stuck there either. I'm not stuck in this local minima. This is the next step on the scientific path. It's going to be refined and tuned and probably toppled in time by the thing which is yet again more optimal and more fit to real world dynamics. But this is where we're at, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, I think I would say kind of universality and the elegance of it in having this universal kind of currency is very interesting. It kind of prompts me neither to be too like overly enthusiastic or skeptical about it. I think it's like Mark said, it's probably what we might expect from a theory of brain function. I kind of watch with interest the empirical story unfold with it. I'm very interested in looking at some of the experimental work and kind of very interested in work by people like Anil Seth, again, here at Sussex, like neuroscientists that are working on consciousness that use these frameworks as well from an experimental kind of perspective. But there are people who have been skeptical the other way, that it's, how is it that it can do so much with so few primitives? So you have prediction and prediction error, and then it's supposed to explain everything.
I like Julian. Julian says everything under the umbrella of human intelligence can be written on a T-shirt. I love that. Actually, in my classes, my students who get an A or over, they get a shirt with it on it. They get the equation underlying all of human intelligence on their T-shirt.
I never got a T-shirt.
Hey, I'll get you one.
Yeah.
You got an A, so you're.
One example of this, for example, is there's some really cool work in philosophy by Colin Klein, who wrote a paper kind of very skeptical that asking whether predictive processing can do the work that folk psychology kind of needs it to. So folk psychology is just the kind of set of concepts and explanations that we use every day to explain people's behavior. So you have this kind of belief, desire, intention kind of schema to explain why people do the things that they do. And the argument in Klein is that it's kind of difficult to see how you can give those kinds of explanations using just prediction and prediction error. And then you have as well the famous dark room problem. I don't know if everybody would be familiar with this or it's worth explaining, or but it's essentially it's the idea of if all you do is kind of if all you're trying to do is minimize prediction error, why do anything at all? Because surely the most efficient way to kind of confirm all my expectations is to just curl up in a ball under my bed and kind of hook myself up to an IV maybe and just live in the dark. So like, why are we curious? Why do we do things like rock climbing or cage fighting or any danger? Like, why do we do anything? And so like the challenge there is to explain this kind of cluster of things like play, which Mark's done work on curiosity, risk-taking, exploration. And I think it's really kind of nice and reassuring to see that predictive processing can explain those things. And a lot of the work done there is kind of quite, illuminating and like resourceful as well, like the way that you can actually build quite complex accounts of pretty much anything, all of the phenomena that we're interested in using those primitives.
Yeah, and Mark and I kind of tackled the dark room problem on our previous podcast. Okay. So shameless plug. Go watch that if you're concerned about that problem now too, as I was when Mark brought it up, and I was like, no, how do we solve this problem? Okay,
it's like my whole career has been against the dark room. I mean, I'm just thinking like every paper I've written has been like, this is an oversimplification. This is how it works to make it more complex.
All right. Thanks guys for talking.
Jack, anyway. always a pleasure, and have us back on. Like, we should come back on and talk about horror and like the benefit of horror movies and violent video games on mental health, which is such a good topic.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. And I'll put links to your work and everything in the description.